All right, so you can measure radiation from pollen on the pollen from 12,000 years ago, depending on the depth of the lake in the mud and the silt, because they know the approximate accumulation of sediments in these lakes. So once they start drilling down, they really can wire it in literally within like 5 years or so. It's stunning how far they can go back in history and really measure it down at the bedrock. On preciseness is getting ridiculous on these measurements now within 5 years of events. So here we got the most intense solar storm ever recorded struck Earth in 12,350 BC. So you add 2,000 years because, we got to add two. So it's 14,350 years ago, which is very similar to the 13,500 years ago Randall Carlson, Graham Hancock, and everybody else talks about, minus 1,000 years. So if they're talking about the Younger Dryas impact occurring around 12,300 years ago, and this occurred somewhere in that same range, plus or minus 1,000 years, like what was going on with the Earth at that time? Like what was going on with our solar system when we got hit by the biggest solar storm ever recorded, as far as they can go back with any proxy to measure anything in radioisotopes? And then suddenly the Younger Dryas hits, so this cometary impact on the ice sheet in Canada. Like those two massive events occur with just in 1,000 years of each other, or even overlap, depending. That sounds strange to me. I don't know. Something was going on that's very, very, very different than what we
It's
would
fun.
give for this gradualism in terms of, in a century it'll be 1 degree warmer. Temperatures rose and fell 10 degrees Celsius in like a decade back then. After these events, a decade. That's like 1 degree per year. They're trying to give us a global tax on 1 degree per century. Like the amount of change that occurred during some events in Earth's history in the past is just so far over what you can even sell to anybody in terms of fear base. Like this is a terrifying event. Like that would have, if you weren't in a dolmen or somewhere underground, you literally would not have made it. You would have been irradiated to the point of death. Animals, trees, all that would have gone through an extinction level event due to radiation. Depending on what side of the planet it was and how long the duration event it was, and which, was it over the ocean? Was it over land? How did the Earth spin at that time? Exactly where did that hit? And they go through some of the information. The traces are there. But they want to sell you on a 1 degree warming over 150 years when we're talking about 10 Celsius over a single decade here. So
Well, it's really funny that they even are.
how is this possible? Lapping or revamping and a push into a new world and the stopping of global trade, a new economy emerges based on cryptocurrency, and then the Earth's changing, its magnetic field is shifting and declining, and we're just supposed to believe this is all randomly happenstance, that all these layers are exactly in these same years. That's just not possible. It's not. Even the most wild percentages don't give it anywhere close to the possibility of all these things overlapping, of such monumental, gargantuan change of our civilization that is experienced since the Younger Dryas event. You can't tell me that something else is here and occurring that's terrifying governments to the point where we can't even print money anymore. We're just going to do it digitally. If the system fails, whatever, everybody will lose. It doesn't matter. They don't have any physical thing to claim on because the physical cash is going away. Like those dollar bills you have in your wallet right now, those are going to be museum pieces in less than a few years. No claim. What do you mean? What do you mean I had dollars that were valuable, that were worth something? Oh, the new economy. No, there's not. It was all digital. There's nothing left. Solar flare like that, there's nothing. Your paper would last, but the digital won't. Perhaps that's what the plan is to like fake digitize everything, knowing that it'll be lost in some sort of solar storm or electrical grid downage, and then it'll never come back. And we don't have any record of that. I mean, if all that tumultuous eventage were to happen, people would be migrating all over the place. Would you really bring all those? You might in the beginning bring a backpack full of those papers that you had of mortgage notes and paid off this and stock claims and these sort of things. But at the end of it, through years and years and years of running around, you're going to lose that paperwork. And then what do you have? Well, this bank had my stuff, and I had this thing on this yellow piece of paper, this blue piece of paper, this pink piece of paper that said I own that thing, but I don't have it anymore. Well, I'm sorry, we don't have any computer records left. Well, I used to have this bank account from this digital. Well, I'm sorry, we don't have any. That system is gone. It was fried by the solar flare in 2032. You don't remember that? Everything gets reset to zero at that point. So enjoy it while it lasts. It's going to be a great ride. I'm super excited to be alive right now. This is an amazing time. But anyway, I'll let you talk, Ransom. I think I've babbled too much, man.
Well, I was going to show you this here. Let's see if I can get it on here, right? There we go. Experimentation confirms electric power generation from Earth's rotation. In other words, they're going to finally go ahead and publish and put out there that it's easy to get electricity from Earth's rotation and the magnetic field while it moves through its own magnetic field. So this may be the answer to all of these things where people are worried about in the future after the reset. What is going to be their power generation? Well, depending on the sophistication of what you're doing, it looks like maybe these little autonomous drones, robots, and other things, and maybe even backup servers, things like this will now be run off of literally the Earth and the Earth's rotation combined with the magnetic field of Earth. And what's funny to me is what you were talking about, the Younger Dryas whole narrative there still being pushed back on as far as it goes for the Columbia or the Carolina Bays. And it's really bizarre that they're doing that because there's papers out about massive airbursts over Israel, over upper Iran. So people right around the time of Göbekli Tepe would have, when they were building that, would have recently saw these giant explosions in the sky. And they might have even seen massive devastation through tsunamis from the massive chunks of, this glacier that got impacted by large rocks that would send these big boulders of ice out, which would in turn hit back on the Earth like little Nagasaki bombs all over, the Western Hemisphere, and maybe some even out into the Atlantic Ocean there, which would have caused massive devastation. And then you get things like Göbekli Tepe, Karen Tepe being built. And we know around those times there's some good papers out about not only objects hitting where we traditionally now think of the Carolina Bays, but over in the Middle East and places like Israel, Iran, further up into Turkey, they would have witnessed these large airbursts that would have just flattened everything on the ground. So even if you were really, really far away, you would have been hearing loud booms, and possibly even if you live close enough, a giant percussion wave that would have hit you. And can you imagine how scary that would have been? And that might be the reason that led to some of these underground, things. Or literally, they were scared of the sky. If they had rumors of a time when the magnetic field might have not been doing its job, and stuff like you were saying, they would have been getting sick from radiation poisoning, literally from the sun. And it really, our history really indicates that ancient man knew about these things. I brought up before the red ochre phenomenon, that it goes into so many different cultures. They were spreading red ochre all over their skin, undoubtedly because of its sun blocking benefits. And you see this from Egypt, a lot of the ancient societies in the Mediterranean, like the Minoans and the Sardinians, and on and on and on. Even Greeks wore it, but you find it with the red paint culture and different stuff like that. So all over the world, there was some kind of ancestral knowledge about danger coming from the sun. And imagine all of the solar religions that popped up after this time period. If you really think the sun can just, get mad at you and burn your skin on the ground, not to mention these other cataclysms associated with the sky. Where'd you go?
Well, maybe I can dovetail on that there. If electrical current can structure water, and we always talk about, and who was the scientist in Japan? Yamamoto, who had talked about putting thought into water. And we know currently that if you put an electrical current in water, you can change the state of it. So if we have these giant discharges coming down, and I'm talking about electrical discharges into the atmosphere, The minerals of our crust would have picked that charge up and restructured the water in different areas. Now, that restructuring would have taken many forms. Perhaps it was healing, perhaps superpowering or superpower giving water. But in other areas, it might have had some sort of dissipating charge where that water would have depleted. So you have to look back in history, and where do we find places that were completely devoid of people compared to where were these super giants and super gods that, because when you go around ancient history of the world, not every place had such powerful beings as just the base of their society. Some areas were completely empty on the planet. So you have to really wonder, with these same events electrifying the water in the Earth's crust, how would that affected the habitants on top consuming the water? Whatever substrate it runs through, maybe it runs through limestone and it gives it a different charge, some ion pops off into the water and it's like an H2O plus or whatever electrically slammed onto there. And whatever that, maybe that's like a salt mine where you drink it and it doesn't hydrate you, it dehydrates you. Well, if you're in that area, you're not going to last very long, a few days. But perhaps other areas where something else was slammed onto there ionically and it turned and turbocharged the human body. You have to look at water as something very, very powerful that can be structured and changed depending on the electric current or the vibration or the thought into it. Yamoto was the scientist's names. Like they would hold those jars and put thought into them. They would do the same with food that contained water, like boiled rice and thing. And they had a bunch of people pray over it and give happy thoughts, and they could structure the water and how it would freeze. And these, these rocks are showing right there. Yeah, the way you use your finger and you can change the flow of that on top of those. So I've seen a lot of different videos where people will just move their finger over it and it'll change how much water is flowing over that lip there. But if that's the purpose of those crystalline substrate in rock, you're talking with a quartzite right there to charge the water as it's coming over. Can you imagine charge from a plasma discharge event? Like you're adding electrical current into something that's already charged to structure water on a crystalline format anyway. And now you're going to supercharge that with electricity. Who knows what's going to happen with a crystalline structure in there? And then that water is going to take on that effect. So I'm going to encourage everybody out there, look around the world. Where were the bases of the world as we from this Younger Dryas commentary impact? Yeah, that would be about how terrifying it would be to witness or even hear something like that. Like the dust storms that would have come from that across the Middle East. Can you imagine dust moving at 300 or 400 miles an hour with just very large pieces in it? It wouldn't be the very, very fine grained dust that we see in dust storms now. You're talking pebbles would have been blowing 100 miles an hour, ripping apart everything. Even if you're Dolman, you'd still be terrified. Like the amount of pebbles and rocks and gravel just getting slammed up against your whatever protective rock face there. I mean, that's going to chip away little by little. It's like a sandblaster going through. I mean, you would feel it getting thinner. Let's say that. And also, traveling in Croatia, I am absolutely 1000% sure, and my sixth sense went like super uber crazy on this one. Like the boulders were of a certain size coming off right on the coastline. But as you got higher up into the hills, the boulders started to get smaller. And as we went further inland, like 100 miles inland, the boulders were the exact same circumference and size of that same white limestone, but they had dissipated in size to smaller and smaller pieces as uniform in size wherever you went. Along the coastline, you got big boulders, like boulder fields. But as you went inland, and then about 100 miles in, there was the size of probably good sized bowling balls, maybe a little bigger, but the average size was a very nice, and they were very rounded, not exactly round, but took the shape of sort of Imagine going over to Göbekli Tepe, way out at the far feathering edge of that, on an ionic wind pushing. You would have been buried in little tiny fine grains of sand, perfectly layered. Perhaps that story they tell us about humans filling in to Göbekli Tepe is not really the full truth. Because the gods of Greece talk about sculpting that Adriatic Sea out with their hands, right? Would that not be discharge planetary lightning forming those boulders coming off, ionic winds pushing out in many a direction? So the Göbekli Tepe is at the far end of that wind flow pattern coming off the Adriatic Sea. I'm curious myself, on the other direction, would it be an equidistant blast pattern? Because Andy Hall is really the one that could figure this one out. But at the far edge of it, prevailing winds would have carried that over because the winds, the patterns they blow. But going west into Europe, the smaller pieces, pebble size, would have stopped somewhere and dropped out because they were going into the wind. There's got to be boulder layers and gravel layers from that same discharge event west, somewhere around in Italy, or even over into Slovenia, somewhere like that. But anyway, I thought I would share that story because it really kind of hit home in terms of whatever electrical event took place, everything was uniform size across that entire region there. So if we saw it with ice also, when something hits ice, it comes off in certain, blast patterns as well. I can't imagine like multi-ton blocks of ice 50,000 feet in the air coming back down and what kind of splash patterns those would create. Holy smokes, man. Holy smokes. I guess you'd have some ice for your drinks and the cocktails and the martinis. Sending, I guess, of ice is blasting back your way. Oh, let me get a couple for the drinks. Hey, we're watching the end of the world here.
Yeah, they might have been a little hard to catch coming in really fast, I think Ryan showed a picture of Egypt there just a second ago.
All right, I'll wait for it to break up. And
yeah. Yeah, right there. Look at that. You see that ancient city right there? Now, keep in mind that over the last 20,000 years, our ocean has rose 400 feet. So for this area to be underwater, you can tell it's a lot older than 5,000 years old. I mean, just that alone, because over the last thousands of years, it had to have been underwater. And then think about this for the people that think, there's these different theories out there that one day we might have a water world, or, there would be massive flooding like the days of Noah, or the Younger Dryas, the Great Flood. The problem with that is those giant ice sheets do not exist anymore. So there's no supply of massive amounts of water on land to flood the ocean. And keep this in mind, about 125,000 years ago was the last, what would they call it? The global warm spell, right? And even at that time, with all of the ice melted, the oceans were only 18 feet above what they are today. So that means that there'll never be a worldwide flooding event in the way that people think of it. However, you can look at these places like that, and you could probably tell that, for the last several thousand years, that has been submerged in water. So it's just been sitting in there preserved with water, not like currents blowing over it or erosion, just submerged in the water. And they couldn't have been using this. So that puts this whole complex back way past 5,000 years, I would imagine, probably back into about the 12,000 year range. And then when you look at these places like in Peru and different stuff with that, ancient, what appears to be ancient technology that cut all of that stuff. They were building that stuff to be massively earthquake proof. And there should have been some reason that they were building at some of the highest places around the earth. I mean, think about that. Now, I actually do think that Göbekli Tepe was buried by humans, because I think they feared that event might happen again, and they were trying to preserve it. Because when you look around at those stones, they have that main pillar has those big bags of water up in the sky. It has a reference to a comet, which probably is talking about the Younger Younger Dryas event. And then not only that, you have a bunch of various animals that did exist at one time but no longer exist. So it's kind of like an encyclopedia or a school or like a time capsule of the way the world was pre-Diluvian. And I think they put that on purpose. But if you notice, it's really rounded rock. And if you compare that to other places around the world, that might have been the start of the new Neolithic age, so to speak, because it's less good rock work. When you look at some of these oldest places around anywhere from Greek or some of the islands in the Mediterranean, you see that the workmanship was way better in the ancient past. And the further you get closer to this time, the more rubble style or smaller block style masonry you see. And this seems to be a reference right here at Göbekli Tepe to an event that happened. And if this place is 11,000 or 12,000 years old, that would mean that the event happened before they made this place, because they're referencing it. That probably, most likely, you see those bags at the top. That's probably the Milky Way. And, you have reference to some of the zodiac symbols there. They were depicting some kind of cataclysm that they witnessed. They saw it. And that's why they put all this stuff up. In my opinion, that's what that place is the aftermath construction to try to tell you that there was civilization before the event.
You think it's an after witness. So the Judicula stone here in North Carolina would be something very similar, where from that place, I'd done a whole video on this, referencing Andy Hall's work on the supersonic blast patterns coming off of an ionic wind that shapes things like an arrow, the opposite direction of the blast, a 90-degree to it. So if you were over in North Carolina at the Judicula stone and looking west over here to Tennessee, you would have seen, yeah, that's it right there. You would have seen that's what they witnessed in the sky in an aftermath event. They were able to scroll those down. Those are all plasma petroglyphs that you're looking at. But all the blast patterns are right over in Tennessee, right down to Chota, where very close to where I live, is where the dissipation pattern was at its very smallest. And I marked all these areas. It took some time going through Google Earth and going up there, because I mean, it can drive to some of these places. And I was following it. Sure enough, it came into a pretty much straight line looking at all the blast pattern. But, it's really wet here. Things grow on top. So there's been a lot of erosion over those last, 12,000 years or so, that event would have taken place with such gigantic plasma events that scarred our planet over here. And if you look at on Google Earth down into Tennessee, you're going to see electric geology absolutely right here. That's what they witnessed. So what would you do if you saw something like that in the sky? It ended your civilization. Would you not put it on a stone like this to try to warn others, whether it's Göbekli Tepe or whether it's Judicula stone or Judicula rock, however you like to term that? Same principles apply. I mean, for our world today, are any of us good enough stone sculptors to be able to leave this as a warning for the next generations coming up, next centuries, next millennia? And again, another question that should be asked is, what took us out of the super glaciation period and then turned that off? We were in full glaciation for 80,000 years, and then suddenly it just turns off. What was that, Milankovitch cycles? Was it the passing of another planetary system? Because, you got me thinking there. Wormwood / Nibiru is supposed to be on a 30 or a 3,600 year orbit. 6 of those orbits is 21,600 years. Was it a close pass that turned that particular mechanism on or off? Because nobody's trying to talk about this. They keep talking about global warming forever. But at the height of the glaciation, then we came out somewhat 20,000 years, 19, 18, 17, eking into that. What made us come out of full-blown glaciation? And why do we go back into it? And why do we come out of it on a regular pattern?